Welcome to the New York Times Close-Up. I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and this November, New Yorkers get to vote on revising the city charter. The outcome of those votes could change our political landscape. The Mayor's City Charter Commission Chairman, Cesar Perales, will explain in a moment. My Times colleague Jonathan Mahler previews his provocative article in this Sunday's Times Magazine called Watch What You Say, a lesson learned very well by a private school math teacher. My Times colleagues discuss the week's lead stories on The Backstory, and I'll add some additional thoughts on Coda. But first, Cesar Perales, the chairman of the Mayor's Charter Revision Commission. You may remember him as the State Social Services Commissioner under Governor Mario Cuomo, former deputy mayor under David Dinkins. The Charter Commission came out with its 3 proposals this week. They will be on the ballot separately in November. Give us a capsule version of what they say.
Well, before that, it's good to see you, Sam.
Thank you.
It's been a long time. There are 3 ballot measures that the voters will get an opportunity to vote on. The first has to do with finance, campaign finance, how much money one can give to a candidate. We are capping that amount, reducing it from $5,000 that one could give to a mayoral candidate to $2,000. That $5,000 applies to the citywide candidates, lesser amounts for the others. And at the same time, we're going to increase the government match. Currently it is 6-1. We will increase it 8-1. That is, it will be increased if the voters vote yes, if they approve that ballot measure. The second has to do with community boards. For the first time, we will be applying term limits to community boards so that they will serve up to 8 years, then have to step off for 2 years, and then be eligible to be reappointed for another 8 years. I think that's an important thing. We are at the same time requiring borough presidents to have a more transparent way of selecting people who will serve on the community boards. And lastly, we're talking about creating a civic engagement commission. New York City has this terrible record of not voting during elections. We think that there have to be ways to engage our citizenry, and we're going to do that through the Civic Engagement Commission. One of the things that will be done if this is approved is that we will have a citywide participatory budgeting system. In other words, for local projects, small local projects, we're going to get the local community engaged, having them select how we spend that money locally.
Don't we do that with community boards, with community planning districts, with things like that, with borough presidents who don't have too many other functions, frankly?
Well, participatory budgeting is a little bit different. It is done in some places by city council members. But what this is a way of having the citizenry come together. There'll be a tremendous reach out, get people into a room to discuss whether the playground needs to be fixed, whether we need a new elevator in the senior center. Capital projects that the city normally undertakes, we're going to let the community decide what they want to do with this amount of money.
Decide or recommend?
Well, technically it's recommend. In essence, it is to decide. I can't imagine that the mayor will say, no, I won't do the elevators in the senior center. I think in essence, these decisions will stick.
How close did the commission come to really anything revolutionary in terms of at least voting, to come up with ranked voting, to get rid of low turnout runoff primaries, things like that, that really might have changed the system much more drastically?
We came very close on 2 things. Ranked voting, which people should understand is giving a number to each candidate. Your favorite candidate is number 1. Your next favorite is number 2. This allows people to have, you don't need to go back and vote again. Rather, come down and use a methodology to determine which candidate really is the favorite of the voters. The problem was that we learned during that process that there were many cities that had done that and then gone back to the old system. There were a number of questions. How would you implement it? How do you do the counting? We did not have the time to actually work all of that out so that we could put a system before the voters. And we didn't have the time to come up with another way of redistricting the city council. Right now, everyone agreed that the city council, in essence, redistricts itself because it appoints the independent redistricting commission. And so everyone said that that's not good, but no one could agree on a way to replace that system.
So in principle, would you favor a independent redistricting commission, and in principle, would you favor ranked voting, assuming you could work out the mechanics of both?
In principle, yes, but I'd need to see the details of any particular. For example, there are ways in which you can redistrict which I think would not work. I would not like. So, but in principle, I do think that we do need to make these changes.
What is the impact of money in politics? Does it really buy what? Access, influence, or is it all perception that if someone gives, they're going to get?
Well, perception is terrible. I mean, you don't know how many people came before us to testify and said, we all know that if you give a lot of money, you influence the elected official. Whether or not that's true is not relevant. The fact is that people believe it. And when you're in a working class community and they learn that a person can give over $5,000 and their spouse can give over $5,000, to them that's an enormous amount of money. They say, of course they're going to get special attention from the elected official. So that's what we were dealing with. I think we were dealing with the perception of corruption that is very wide in our city, and it's something I think this takes us one step toward addressing.
The City Council is coming up with its own charter commission. It will probably be on the ballot next year. What are you worried that they might do?
Well, I don't worry about what charter commissions do. I think they're wonderful. But frankly, it is possible that they could dramatically change the way powers are distributed between the executive and the legislature. So that I do think that they've got a terrific opportunity to make changes in the way the city works, just as we did. I'm hopeful that they will take advantage of it.
Those three issues on the ballot coming up in November from Cesar Perales of the Charter Revision Commission. Don't forget to vote first this coming Thursday in the New York State primaries. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back with Jonathan Mahler of the New York Times previewing his Sunday Magazine article next. Welcome back. Joining me now, my Times colleague, Sunday Magazine staff writer Jonathan Mahler. His article in this Sunday's magazine at nytimes.com, Watch What You Say. A teacher made a Hitler joke in the classroom. It tore the school apart. This was the Friends School on the Lower East Side, the Friends Seminary, a Quaker-run and pricey private school in Manhattan. The teacher, a longtime math instructor there, and what started innocently enough, or thoughtlessly enough, turned into a very unpeaceful battle among the pacifists. Jonathan, give us a quick summary of what this is about.
Sure. Well, what happened last winter is that, as you said, a math teacher at Friends Seminary was demonstrating angles of elevation and depression. And when he lifted his arm up to demonstrate the angle of elevation, he looked at his arm and realized that he was pantomiming the Heil Hitler salute. He was embarrassed, and in that kind of moment didn't quite know what to do to sort of diffuse the tension. So he said Heil Hitler. And some of the students were shocked, at least taken aback, and but the moment seemed to have passed. Well, it turned out that one of the students spoke to an administrator, an advisor. Word got passed up to the head of the school, and he was fired.
Stupid, thoughtless, tin ear, but is that a fireable offense?
Well, that's sort of what the controversy is about. The school would say that this was the principal event, but then they went back and kind of investigated his past and found a couple other incidents that they also thought were sort of similarly thoughtless. though this was really the triggering event.
Now this,
Yep.
as you said, is a high school class. These
Yeah.
weren't
They're
kindergarten.
seniors with a smattering of juniors.
And was he a good teacher?
Yeah, I mean, it's so subjective. So I talked to a lot of students, and some really connected with him. Some didn't think he was great, but everyone whom I spoke with, for the most part, I mean, virtually everyone, really had sort of warm feelings toward him, and certainly no one would accuse him of being an anti-Semite. In fact, his father was Jewish. And he lost relatives in Auschwitz.
So we're talking about a period where people are criticizing the coddling of the American mind. Is this an example of that?
It's hard to say that it isn't. I mean, it really feels like an overreaction. It feels like an overreaction designed to protect children from something that it's hard to believe they really need to be protected from. Hearing someone make a bad and possibly even tasteless joke. I mean, there's of course.
If they watch late night television,
Exactly.
or if they read what goes on in the White House, isn't that worse than what happened in this classroom?
Yes, and it would only take a minute to contextualize a joke like that, even if it's in the form of an apology. It could be an explanation. Mel Brooks, Hogan's Heroes. I could go on. I mean, there's a long history of making fun of Nazis as a way to kind of make sense of and sort of reduce this tragedy, or to understand it and to get past it.
No, I wouldn't want to be caught in the position of having to decide this thing, frankly, but is this the head of the school reacting to parents who are overreacting?
Well, he certainly heard from a lot of parents. I think many of them actually were spoken in support of this teacher, but a number spoke out against this teacher and told him that they felt that this would be the equivalent of basically sending the message that the school does not take anti-Semitism seriously, to not fire this teacher. So it seems as though the head of the school certainly was affected by what he was hearing from the community, from parents. But really, the vast majority of people were speaking out against the decision to fire him.
So it's not just what the teacher said, it's also what the student said. The two editors of the student newspaper were fired for an offense that I never heard of, now digital misconduct.
Right.
We could all be fired for that.
Yes. Yeah, they basically wanted to put out a special issue of the newspaper about this controversy, and the administration felt that the range of opinions was not diverse enough, which is to say they wanted some people speaking out in support of the school in
Well,
this
that
issue.
sounds fair, actually, I guess.
Well, yes, but the students, the editors did reach out to the whole staff of the newspaper, and no one wanted to write a piece defending the administration. So, I mean, and also really in their defense, I mean, it's their newspaper. So they felt that the administration was really sort of stalling them, wasn't going to approve the issue. So rather than getting the paper printed, they just sort of guerrilla style sent it out to the entire school. And
Online.
And used, so I guess that was the digital misconduct, that they used email addresses that they weren't supposed to use to send out the paper.
And Jonathan, what happens now? Is the teacher in some sort of limbo?
Yeah, he had his arbitration hearing just a couple weeks ago, and so he's challenging his termination through the union there at the school. The school has the faculty has a union, and. He had his hearing a couple weeks ago, and the arbitrator is now, deciding what to do. So
And the options are?
The options are, I mean, he could either be reinstated and just return to the school, which would really be something else after 6 months of this, or the arbitrator could uphold the decision, or the arbitrator could I suppose a third way would be to kind of bring together the school and the teacher and try to figure out a solution that would either allow him to go back to work, but maybe after a period of time, a year, a semester, or maybe in a different capacity. Really the arbitrator kind of has the leeway to do whatever he thinks is appropriate.
Well, we'll look for you in the Times at nytimes.com to find out how this story ends. Thanks for joining us, Jonathan Mahler of the New York Times, and we'll be back with the backstory. Welcome back. What kind of week has it been? Unbearably humid and hot. Politically, the temperament even more heated, especially in Washington. Joining me to discuss these stories and more, my Times colleagues, contributing writer Eleanor Randolph, Metro education reporter Eliza Shapiro, and City Hall Bureau reporter William Newman. Eliza, school started this week. How was your first day?
The first day is always a little hectic because the chancellor visits a school in each of the 5 boroughs. So you're sort of careening around the city in an unair-conditioned van. But otherwise, the chancellor is very, very, very excited to be here.
And this is the chancellor in his first year, in a full year in the school system. What are the challenges facing the school system this year?
Yeah, I think Richard Carranza has created some of the challenges for himself by promising to at least partially desegregate one of the most segregated school systems in the entire country. He's made a lot of lofty promises, said that potentially in a few years people won't identify New York City as one of the most segregated school districts, but there's a huge, enormous challenge there because of how concentrated the segregation is.
The mayor talks about desegregating the specialized schools. He says that he really needs state permission to do that, but he can do that on the lower level schools on his own. So why hasn't he done that before?
Yes, absolutely. He has the power to tonight basically change admissions at 5 of the 8 specialized schools. He has acknowledged that there is a legal path to do so when I've pressed him about it, but he's said, well, what if someone sues us? What if there's a legal issue? Of course, the mayor is sued and sues all the time, so that wasn't necessarily so convincing to me, but he's made the argument that you either fix all 8 at once, you desegregate all 8 at once legislatively, or nothing.
Speaking of the mayor, Willie, is he endorsing anyone in the statewide elections? Does anybody want his endorsement?
Well, he's been hemming and hawing and dancing around that idea for months now, much like he did with Hillary Clinton back in the presidential election. He has said that by the end of the week, he will decide whether or not to endorse. It's looking more and more like he will endorse nobody in the statewide races. And I think there's a lot of calculations there. I think that if he were to endorse his good friend and fellow progressive Cynthia Nixon, there's a sense that he might incur even more ire from the governor than he already does now. And when people say that to me, I say, is it possible the relationship would get worse? And people say, yes, it is. So that's certainly a factor that's being considered. And I think a lot of people have written off Cynthia Nixon. And so they kind of think, well, what is the benefit of a potential endorsement? And you could say, well, upstate, an endorsement from the mayor might actually hurt Cynthia Nixon.
It hurt Mario Cuomo when Mayor Giuliani endorsed him back in the 90s.
But then there's also the Attorney General race, and there his wife, Shirlane McCray, endorsed Zephyr Teachout, which was kind of a surprise because it was the first time she had gone out on her own with an endorsement. Now she is talking about having her own political career. And there is a sense, I think, that the mayor could have it both ways. In other words, if he's deciding not to endorse himself, by Shirlane coming out with an endorsement of Zephyr Teachout, it's almost like a pocket endorsement or a stealth endorsement by the mayor himself. People will see it that way. It may not have the same negative effect upstate that an endorsement of his might have, or not as much. So,
let's talk about the op-ed piece that is on everyone's mind, everyone's lips, that ran in the New York Times this week by someone from the Trump administration criticizing the president, saying specifically the root of the problem is the president's amorality. 2 questions struck me, among many others. One, should this person, him or her, have come out publicly and said, this is so bad that I'm writing this piece identifying myself and I quit? and had more impact that way. And secondly, and this is a perhaps subsidiary point, but one I think that needs to be addressed, in that piece it said negative coverage of the administration fails to capture some positive things: effective deregulation, historic tax reform, and a more robust military. And in fact, are we not covering some of those things? Let's start with the first.
Well, the thing is, the fact that it was anonymous, I think one of the things I thought happened was that people focused on what was in the piece first, and then they started talking about the guessing game went on. I sort of thought that if you named the person, that it would be about that person and not about the substance of that piece. That was one thing. The other thing is, it seemed to me that, there must be some people in that administration who want to come away with a little of their reputation intact. And the only way they can do that is if it appears that they are there not to serve Trump, but to serve the country. I mean, clearly this person is a conservative. Clearly this person, I wouldn't agree with a lot of the things that this person feels are really important. But it seems to me that this person is trying to say, look, having this on your resume is not a killer, because we were trying to make the country safer, not serve Donald Trump.
But quickly, when do you have more impact by quitting publicly than sticking around and perhaps rationalizing that you could have more impact by being on the inside?
Well, that's the big question. I mean, that is really the hardest question. I mean, look at the Defense Secretary, Mattis. I mean, there are all these rumors now that he's being pushed out, and for some of us, he's sort of the remaining adult in the room.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's think about all those things, and I'm sure we'll continue this discussion next week.
We will.
Thanks to Eleanor Randolph, Eliza Shapiro, William Newman for joining me, and I'll have some additional thoughts coming up. Wisconsin and New Hampshire are among the states that have claimed to be the birthplace of the Republican Party, but a compelling case could be made that it was founded in Lower Manhattan. It was 1852, during the Whig Party's National Convention, that anti-slavery sentiment congealed over a dinner at Lovejoy's Hotel on Park Row and Beekman Street. The guests were Horace Greeley, the editor of the New York Tribune, and Alvin Beauvais, a New York lawyer who had transplanted himself to Ripon, Wisconsin. 2 years later, Greeley would encapsulate the results of that dinner in an editorial. We should not care much whether those thus united were designated Whig, Free Democrat, or something else, he wrote, though we think some simple name like Republican would more fitly designate those who had united to restore the Union to its true mission of champion and promulgator of liberty rather than propagandist of slavery. The Republicans went on to nominate Lincoln in 1860. He lost New York City, but won the election. The rest, as they say, is history. For a state that can lay claim to being the party's birthplace, its latest incarnation is pretty pathetic. If Republicans lose control of the state Senate in November, this would be only the second time in well over a century that the party did not hold even one major state office. No Republican has become controller since 1990. None has been elected Attorney General since 1994. No Republican challenger has defeated an incumbent Democratic governor in 24 years either. Both United States senators from New York are Democrats. In the legislature, Republicans last controlled the Assembly in 1974. Democrats, the governor in particular, have conveniently blamed the Republican Senate for vetoing a long list of progressive legislation. Twice in the last century, though, the Democrats seized the Senate briefly, after Lyndon Johnson's 1964 landslide and Barack Obama's election in 2008. They pretty much blew their rare opportunity at reform. Giving them a real voting majority in the Senate this time would call their bluff. Why care? Well, if you live in New York City, it's because upstate Republicans who control the Senate exert a veto power over everything from bridge tolls to plastic bags and red light cameras. Legislation that ought to be local responsibilities that local lawmakers are held accountable for are decided upstate. Moreover, whoever controls the legislature after 2020 will dominate the gerrymandering based on the latest census results, which will perpetuate that control for the next decade. Meanwhile, in a state where third parties are permitted to hijack elections, Democrats and Republicans ought to be concerned about the future of the two-party system. The day that Horace Greeley wrote his editorial in 1854, Barnum's Museum placed a front-page advertisement in the New York Tribune inviting the public to see the only living unicorn in America. Even unicorns don't live forever. Neither do political parties. Consider this. In the latest count, more New Yorkers left their party affiliation blank or listed themselves as independents than the number who enrolled as Republicans. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.